Book 3, Chapter 1 of A History of Florence. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Morgan Scorpion. History of Florence and of the Affairs of Italy, Volume 1, by Niccolo Machiavelli, translator unknown. Book 1, Chapter 3. Reflections upon the domestic discords of republics. A parallel between the discords of Rome and those of Florence. Enmities between the families of the Ricci and the Albizzi. Uguccione de' Ricci causes the laws against the Ghibellines to be renewed in order to injure the Albizzi. Piero degli Albizzi derives advantage from it. Origin of admonitions and the troubles which result from them. Uguccione de' Ricci moderates their injustice. Difficulties increase. A meeting of the citizens. They address the Signory. The Signory attempt to remedy the evils. Those serious though natural enmities which occur between the popular classes and the nobility, arising from the desire of the latter to command, and the disinclination of the former to obey, are the causes of most of the troubles which take place in cities, and from this diversity of purpose all the other evils which disturb republics derive their origin. This kept Rome disunited, and this, if it be allowed to compare small things with great, held Florence in disunion, although in each city it produced a different result, for animosities were only beginning with the people and the nobility of Rome contended, while ours were brought to a conclusion by the contentions of our citizens. A new law settled the disputes of Rome. Those of Florence were only terminated by the death and banishment of many of her best people. Those of Rome increased her military virtue, while that of Florence was quite extinguished by her divisions. The quarrels of Rome established different ranks of society. Those of Florence abolished the distinctions which had previously existed. The diversity of effects must have been occasioned by the different purposes which the two people had in view. While the people of Rome endeavoured to associate with the nobility in the supreme honours, those of Florence strove to exclude the nobility from all participation in them. As the desire of the Roman people was more reasonable, no particular offence was given to the nobility. They therefore consented to it without having recourse to arms, so that after some disputes concerning particular points, both parties agreed to the enactment of a law which, while it satisfied the people, preserved the nobility in the enjoyment of their dignity. On the other hand, the demands of the people of Florence being insolent and unjust, the nobility became desperate, prepared for their defence with their utmost energy, and thus bloodshed and the exile of citizens followed. The laws which were afterward made did not provide for the common good, but were framed wholly in favour of the conquerors. This too must be observed, that from the acquisition of power made by the people of Rome, their minds were very much improved, for all the offices of state being attainable as well by the people as the nobility, the peculiar excellencies of the latter exercised a most beneficial influence upon the former, and as the city increased in virtue, she attained a more exalted greatness. But in Florence, the people being conquerors, the nobility were deprived of all participation in the government, and in order to regain a portion of it, it became necessary for them not only to seem like the people, but to be like them in behaviour, mind, and mode of living. Hence arose those changes in armorial bearings, and in the titles of families, which the nobility adopted, in order that they might seem to be of the people. Military virtue and generosity of feeling became extinguished in them. The people not possessing these qualities, they could not appreciate them, and Florence became by degrees more and more depressed and humiliated. The virtue of the Roman nobility degenerating into pride, the citizens soon found that the business of state could not be carried on without a prince. Florence had now come to such a point, that with a comprehensive mind at the head of affairs, she would easily have been made to take any form that he might have been disposed to give her, as may be partly observed by a perusal of the preceding book. Having given an account of the origin of Florence, the commencement of her liberty, with the causes of her divisions, and shown how the factions of the nobility and the people ceased with the tyranny of the Duke of Athens, and the ruin of the former, we have now to speak of the animosities between the citizens and the plebeians, and the various circumstances which they produced. The nobility being overcome, and the war with the Archbishop of Milan concluded, there did not appear any cause of dissension in Florence. But the evil fortune of the city, and the defective nature of her laws, gave rise to enmities between the family of the Albizzi and that of the Ricci, which divided her citizens as completely as those of the Buono del Monte and the Uberti, or the Donati and the Cerchi had formerly done. The pontiffs, who at this time resided in France, and the emperors, who abode in Germany, in order to maintain their influence in Italy, sent among us multitudes of soldiers of many countries, as English, Dutch, and Bretons. As these, upon the conclusion of a war, were thrown out of pay, though still in the country, they, under the standard of some soldier of fortune, plundered such people as were least prepared to defend themselves. In the year 1353, one of these companies came into Tuscany under the command of Monsignor Reale of Provence, and his approach terrified all the cities of Italy. The Florentines not only provided themselves forces, but many citizens, among whom were the Albizzi and the Ricci, armed themselves in their own defence. These families were at the time full of hatred against each other, and each thought to obtain the sovereignty of the republic by overcoming his enemy. They had not yet proceeded to open violence, but only contended in the magistracies and councils. The city being all in arms, a quarrel arose in the old market-place, and, as it frequently happens in similar cases, a great number of people were drawn together. The disturbance spreading, it was told that the Ricci and the Albizzi had assailed their partisans, and to the Albizzi that the Ricci were in quest of them. Upon this the whole city arose, and it was all the magistrates could do to restrain these families, and prevent the actual occurrence of a disaster which, without being the fault of either of them, had been wilfully though falsely reported as having already taken place. This apparently trifling circumstance served to inflame the minds of the parties, and make each the more resolved to increase the number of their followers. And as the citizens, since the ruin of the nobility, were on such an equality that the magistrates were more respected now than they had previously been, they designed to proceed towards the suppression of this disorder with civil authority alone. We have before related that after the victory of Charles I, the government was formed of the Guelphic party, and that it thus acquired great authority over the Ghibellines. But time, a variety of circumstances, and new divisions had so contributed to sink this party feeling into oblivion, that many of Ghibelline descent now filled the highest offices. Observing this, Uguccione, the head of the family of the Ricci, contrived that the laws against the Ghibellines should be again brought into operation, many imagining the Albizzi to be of that faction, they having arisen in Arezzo, and come long ago to Florence. Uguccione by this means hoped to deprive the Albizzi of participation in the government, for all of Ghibelline blood who were found to hold offices would be condemned in the penalties which this law provided. The design of Uguccione was discovered to Piero, son of Filippo degli Albizzi, and he resolved to favour it, for he saw that to oppose it would at once declare him a Ghibelline, and thus the law which was renewed by the ambition of the Ricci for his destruction, instead of robbing Piero degli Albizzi of his reputation, contributed to increase his influence, although it laid the foundation of many evils. Now it is possible for a republic to enact a law more pernicious than one relating to matters which have long transpired. Piero having favoured this law, which had been contrived by his enemies for his stumbling block, it became the stepping stone to his greatness. For making himself the leader of this new order of things, his authority went on increasing, and he was in greater favour with the Guelphs than any other man. As there could not be found a magistrate willing to search out who were Ghibellines, and as this renewed enactment against them was therefore of small value, it was provided that authority should be given to the Capitani to find out who were of this faction, and having discovered, to signify and admonish them that they were not to take upon themselves any office of government, to which admonitions, if they were disobedient, they became condemned in the penalties. Hence all those who in Florence are deprived of the power to hold offices are called ammoniti, or admonished. The Capitani in time acquiring greater audacity, admonished not only those to whom the admonition was applicable, but any others at the suggestion of their own avarice or ambition; and from 1356, when this law was made, to 1366, there had been admonished above 200 citizens. The captains of the parts and the sect of the Guelphs were thus become powerful, for every one honoured them for fear of being admonished, and most particularly the leaders, who were Piero degli Albizzi, Lapo da Castiglionchio, and Carlo Strozzi. This insolent mode of proceeding was offensive to many, but none felt so particularly injured with it as the Ricci, for they knew themselves to have occasioned it. They saw it involved the ruin of the Republic, and their enemies, the Albizzi, contrary to their intention, became great in consequence. On this account, Uguccione de' Ricci, being one of the Signory, resolved to put an end to the evil which he and his friends had originated, and with a new law provided that to the 6 captains of parts an additional 3 should be appointed, of whom 2 should be chosen from the companies of minor artificers, and that before any party could be declared Ghibelline, the declaration of the Capitani must be confirmed by 24 Guelphic citizens appointed for the purpose. This provision tempered for a time the power of the Capitani, so that the admonitions were greatly diminished, if not wholly laid aside. Still the parties of the Albizzi and the Ricci were continually on the alert to oppose each other's laws, deliberations, and enterprises, not from a conviction of their inexpediency, but from a hatred of their promoters. In such distractions the time passed from 1366 to 1371, when the Guelphs again regained the ascendant. There was in the family of the Buondelmonti a gentleman named Benchi, who, as an acknowledgment of his merit in a war against the Pisans, though one of the nobility, had been admitted among the people, and thus became eligible to office among the Signory. But when about to take his seat with them, a law was made that no nobleman who had been of the popular class should be allowed to assume that office. This gave great offence to Benchi, who, in union with Piero degli Albizzi, determined to depress the less powerful of the popular party with admonitions, and obtain the government for themselves. By the interest which Benchi possessed with the ancient nobility, and that of Piero with most of the influential citizens, the Guelphic party resumed their ascendancy, and by new reforms among the parts, so remodelled the administration as to be able to dispose of the offices of the captains and the 24 citizens at pleasure. They then returned to the admonitions with greater audacity than ever, and the house of the Albizzi became powerful as the head of this faction. On the other hand, the Ricci made the most strenuous exertions against their designs, so that anxiety universally prevailed, and ruin was apprehended alike from both parties. In consequence of this, a great number of citizens, out of love to their country, assembled in the church of San Piero Scaraggio, and after a long consideration of the existing disorders, presented themselves before the Signors, whom one of the principal among them addressed in the following terms: "Many of us, magnificent Signors, were afraid of meeting even for consideration of public business, without being publicly called together, lest we should be noted as presumptuous or condemned as ambitious. But seeing that so many citizens daily assemble in the lodges and halls of the palace, not for any public utility, but only for the gratification of their own ambition, we have thought that as those who assemble for the ruin of the Republic are fearless, so still less ought they to be apprehensive who meet together only for its advantage. Nor ought we to be anxious respecting the opinion they may form of our assembling, since they are so utterly indifferent to the opinion of others. Our affection for our country, magnificent Signors, caused us to assemble first, and now brings us before you to speak of grievances already great and daily increasing in our Republic, and to offer our assistance for their removal. And we doubt not that, though a difficult undertaking, it will still be attended with success, if you will lay aside all private regards, and authoritatively use the public force. The common corruption of all the cities of Italy, magnificent Signors, has infested and still vitiates your own, for when this province had shaken off the imperial yoke, her cities not being subject to any powerful influence that might restrain them, administered affairs, not as free men do, but as a factious populace, and hence have arisen all the other evils and disorders that have appeared. In the first place, there cannot be found among the citizens either unity or friendship, except with those whose common guilt, either against their country or against private individuals, is a bond of union. And as the knowledge of religion and the fear of God seem to be alike extinct, oaths and promises have lost their validity, and are kept as long as it is found expedient. They are adopted only as a means of deception, and he is most applauded and respected whose cunning is most efficient and secure. On this account bad men are received with the approbation due to virtue, and good ones are regarded only in the light of fools. And certainly in the cities of Italy all that is corruptible and corrupting is assembled. The young are idle, the old lascivious, and each sex and every age abounds with debasing habits, which the good laws, by misapplication, have lost the power to correct. Hence arises the avarice so observable among the citizens, and that greediness, not for true glory, but for unworthy honours, from which follow hatred, animosities, quarrels, and factions, resulting in deaths, banishments, affliction to all good men, and the advancement of the most unprincipled. For the good, confiding in their innocence, seek neither safety nor advancement by illegal methods as the wicked do, and thus unhonoured and undefended they sink into oblivion. From proceedings such as these arise at once the attachment for and influence of parties. Bad men follow them through ambition and avarice, and necessity compels the good to pursue the same course. And most lamentable it is to observe how the leaders and movers of parties sanctify their base designs with words that are all piety and virtue. They have the name of liberty constantly in their mouths, though their actions prove them her greatest enemies. The reward which they desire from victory is not the glory of having given liberty to the city, but the satisfaction of having vanquished others, and of making themselves rulers, and to attain their end there is nothing too unjust, too cruel, too avaricious for them to attempt. Thus laws and ordinances, peace, wars, and treaties are adopted and pursued not for the public good, not for the common glory of the state, but for the convenience or advantage of a few individuals. And if other cities abound in these disorders, ours is more than any infected with them, for her laws, statutes, and civil ordinances are not, nor have they ever been, established for the benefit of men in a state of freedom, but according to the wish of the faction that has been uppermost at the time. Hence it follows that when one party is expelled or a faction extinguished, another immediately arises. For in a city that is governed by parties rather than by laws, as soon as one becomes dominant and unopposed, it must of necessity soon divide against itself. For the private methods at first adapted for its defence will now no longer keep it united. The truth of this both the ancient and modern dissensions of our city prove. Every one thought that when the Ghibellines were destroyed, the Guelphs would long continue happy and honoured. Yet after a short time they divided into the Bianchi and Neri, the black faction and the white. When the Bianchi were overcome, the city was not long free from factions, for either in favour of the emigrants, or in account of the animosity between the nobility and the people, we were still constantly at war. And as if resolved to give up to others what in mutual harmony we either would not or were unable to retain, we confided in the care of our precious liberty first to King Robert, then to his brother, next to his son, and at last to the Duke of Athens. Still we have never in any condition found repose, but seem like men who can neither agree to live in freedom nor be content with slavery. Nor did we hesitate, so greatly does the nature of our ordinances dispose us to division, while yet under our allegiance to the king, to substitute for his majesty one of the vilest of men born at Agobbio. For the credit of the city, the name of the Duke of Athens ought to be consigned to oblivion. His cruel and tyrannical disposition, however, might have taught us wisdom and instructed us how to live. But no sooner was he expelled than we handled our arms, and fought with more hatred and greater fury than we had ever done on any former occasion, so that the ancient nobility were vanquished, the city was left at the disposal of the people. It was generally supposed that no further occasion of quarrel or of party animosity could arise, since those whose pride and insupportable ambition had been regarded as the causes of them were depressed. However, experience proves how liable human judgment is to error, and what false impressions men imbibe, even in regard to the things that most intimately concern them. For we find the pride and ambition of the nobility are not extinct, but only transferred from them to the people who at this moment, according to the usual practice of ambitious men, are endeavouring to render themselves masters of the Republic. And knowing that they have no chance of success but what is offered by discord, they have again divided the city, and the names of Guelph and Ghibelline, which were beginning to be forgotten, and it would have been well if they had never been heard among us, are repeated anew in our ears. It seems almost necessarily ordained, in order that in human affairs there may be nothing either settled or permanent, that in all republics there are what may be called fatal families, born for the ruin of their country. Of this kind of pest our city has produced a more copious brood than any other, for not one but many have disturbed and harassed her. First the Buon del Monte and the Uberti, then the Donati and the Cerci, and now, O ridiculous, O disgraceful thought, the Ricci and the Albizzi have caused a division of her citizens. We have not dwelt upon our corrupt habits, or our old and continuous dissensions to occasion you alarm, but to remind you of their causes, to show that as you doubtless are aware of them, we also keep them in view, and to remind you that their results ought not to make you diffident of your power to repress the disorders of the present time. The ancient families possessed so much influence, and were held in such high esteem, that civil force was insufficient to restrain them. But now, when the empire has lost its ascendancy, the Pope is no longer formidable, and the whole of Italy is reduced to a state of the most complete equality, there can be no difficulty. Our republic might more especially than any other, although at first our former practices seem to present a reason to the contrary, not only keep itself united, but be improved by good laws and civil regulations. If you, the Signory, would once resolve to undertake the matter, and to this we, induced by no other motive than the love of our country, would most strongly urge you. It is true the corruption of the country is great, and much discretion will be requisite to correct it, but do not impute the past disorders to the nature of the men, but to the times, which being changed, give reasonable ground to hope that, with better government, our city will be attended with better fortune, for the malignity of the people will be overcome by restraining the ambition and annulling the ordinances of those who have encouraged faction, and adopting in their stead only such principles as are conformable to true civil liberty. And be assured that these desirable ends will be more certainly attained by the benign influence of the laws, than by a delay which will compel the people to effect them by force and arms. The Signory, induced by the necessity of the case, of which they were previously aware, and further encouraged by the advice of those who now addressed them, gave authority to 56 citizens to provide for the safety of the republic. It is usually found that most men are better adapted to pursue a good course already begun, than to discover one applicable to immediate circumstances. These citizens thought rather of extinguishing existing factions than of preventing the formation of new ones, and effected neither of these objects. The facilities for the establishment of new parties were not removed, and out of those which they guarded against, another more powerful arose, which brought the republic into still greater danger. They however deprived 3 of the family of the Albizzi, and 3 of that of the Ricci, of all the offices of government, except those of the Guelfic party, for 3 years. And among the deprived were Piero degli Albizzi and Uguccione de' Ricci. They forbade the citizens to assemble in the palace except during the sittings of the Signory. They provided that if any one were beaten, or possession of his property detained from him, he might bring his case before the council and denounce the offender, even if he were one of the nobility, and that if it were proved, the accused should be subject to the usual penalties. This provision abated the boldness of the Ricci, and increased that of the Albizzi, since, although it applied equally to both, the Ricci suffered from it by far the most. For if Piero were excluded from the palace of the Signory, the chamber of the Guelphs, in which he possessed the greatest authority, remained open to him, and if he and his followers had previously been ready to admonish, they became after this injury doubly so. To this predisposition for evil, new excitements were added. End of Book 3, Chapter 1.